Chapter 4. The Only Way I Could Get Myself Organized. Not long after I began keeping records, I discovered that I was one of the world's poorest self-organizers. I had set a goal of 2,000 calls for the year, and at the rate of 40 a week, but I soon got so hopelessly behind that I was ashamed to put down my records. My intentions were good. I kept making new resolutions, but they never lasted very long. I just couldn't get organized. Finally, I got it through my head that I must take more time for planning. It was easy to throw 40 or 50 prospect cards together and think I was prepared. That didn't take much time. But to go back over the records, study each call carefully, plan exactly what I would say to each person, prepare proposals, write letters, and then make out a schedule, arranging each day's calls, Monday through Friday, in their proper order, required 4 to 5 solid hours of the most intensive kind of work. So I set aside Saturday morning and called it Self-Organization Day. Did this plan help me? Listen, each Monday morning, when I started out, instead of having to drive myself to make calls, I walked in to see men with confidence and enthusiasm. I was eager and anxious to see them because I had thought about them, studied their situation, and had some ideas I believed might be of value to them. At the end of the week, instead of feeling exhausted and discouraged, I actually felt exhilarated and on fire with the excitement that next week I could do even better. After a few years, I was able to move my self-organization day up to Friday morning, then knock off the rest of the week, forgetting business entirely until Monday morning. It is surprising how much I can get done when I take enough time for planning, and it is perfectly amazing how little I get done without it. I prefer to work on a tight schedule 4.5 days a week and get somewhere than to be working all the time and never get anywhere. I read that Henry L. Doherty, the great industrialist, said, "I can hire men to do everything but 2 things: think and do things in the order of their importance." That was my trouble precisely. However, after solving that problem each week for so many years, I believe the real answer is simply this: take enough time to think and plan. At the close of this chapter, you will see a typical weekly timetable. I didn't just make it up as a sample. I pulled a few out of my files and used one of them for my illustration. I don't know why I botched that sentence so bad. At the close of this chapter, you will see a typical weekly timetable. I didn't just make it up as a sample. I pulled a few out of my files and used one of them for illustration. You will also see 1 month's exhibit of record cards, which may also be helpful to anyone planning his time. Yes, I can hear you say, "That's not for me. I can't do that sort of thing. Live on a schedule. I wouldn't be happy." Well, I've got good news for you. You are already living on a schedule. And if it's not a planned one, it's probably a poor one. Let me give you an example. Several years ago, a young man came to me for advice. He had graduated with high honors from one of our oldest and finest colleges and had gone into selling with a lot of promise. Now, after 2 years, he was badly discouraged. He said, "Mr. Betker, tell me frankly, do you think I am cut out to be a salesman?" "No, Ed," I replied. "I don't think you are cut out to be a salesman." His face dropped, but I continued, "I don't think anybody is cut out to be a salesman or anything else. I think we've got to cut ourselves out to be whatever we want to be." "I don't understand, Ed. I always seem to be so busy and working. Why don't I have time to go buy myself a necktie? If I could just get organized." Now I happen to know that this young fellow was a late starter, so I said, "Ed, why don't you join the 6 o'clock club?" "The 6 o'clock club?" he asked. "What's that?" A number of years ago, I explained, I read that Ben Franklin said that only a few men live to old age and fewer still become successful who are not early risers. So I set my alarm clock an hour and a half earlier in the morning. An hour of that time I used for reading and study. Of course, I soon found myself going to bed earlier, but I thrived on it. That day, Ed agreed to buy an alarm clock and join the 6 o'clock club. He set aside Saturday morning for self-organization day. Soon his troubles were behind him, and Ed was selling successfully. Only 4 years later, he was appointed manager of a large eastern territory by one of the great industrial companies. Not long ago, I interviewed one of the executives of the International Business Machines Corporation, a company which holds one of the highest ratings in the world for sales training methods. I asked him how important they consider their weekly worksheet. He said, "Mr. Betker, we furnish our salesmen with certain tools which we know are essential to their success. Our number one tool is the weekly worksheet, which must be completed by the salesman, giving the names of all the people they plan to see during the coming week, and a copy must be turned over to us in advance of each week's work." "Do you enforce this rule in all 79 countries in which you operate?" I asked. "Absolutely," he replied. "What would happen," I asked, "if a salesman refused to use this number one tool?" "It couldn't happen. But if it did, the salesman couldn't work for us." Those were his exact words. Most of the successful men I've met are absolutely ruthless with their time. For example, Lawrence Doolin, one of the officials of the Fidelity Mutual Life Insurance Company of Philadelphia, told me the other day about an experience he had recently. Larry called their Altoona, Pennsylvania manager, Richard W. Campbell, on the telephone one night and said, "Dick, I'm starting on a western trip next week to visit several of our agencies. Monday, I'll be in Harrisburg. Tuesday, I'd like to spend in Altoona with you." Dick replied, "Larry, I'm anxious to see you, but it would be impossible for me to see you before next Friday afternoon." The following Friday, as the two men sat down together at lunch, Larry began, "Were you away all week, Dick?" "No," answered Dick. "I've been around all week." Surprised, Larry said, "Do you mean to say you were here in Altoona on Tuesday?" "Yes," smiled Dick. With considerable feeling of resentment, Larry said, "Dick, do you realize what you made me do? You made me retrace my steps all the way from Cincinnati. Tonight I must go back again, and from there to Detroit." Dick Campbell then explained, "Listen, Larry, before you phoned me, I had spent 5 hours last Friday morning planning this entire week. Tuesday was one of the biggest days. Several appointments had already been arranged. To have spent Tuesday with you would have interrupted my whole week's schedule. Please don't feel offended, Larry. If it had been E.A. Roberts, the president of the company, I'd have done the same thing. Whatever success I've had in this business has been due to the fact that I refuse to allow anything or anybody to interfere with the schedule of the week which I devote every Friday to preparing." Larry Doolin said to me, "Frank, when I first heard this, I was shocked, but I didn't let myself get angry. I quickly realized that here was the real secret of Dick Campbell's phenomenal rise to success." Larry told me that when he got on the train that night, he was fired with a new enthusiasm. Since that time, he has been telling this story to salesmen all over the country. Back in 1926, I spent most of the summer at Eaton's Dude Ranch, located in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains, near Sheridan, Wyoming. Mary Roberts Reinert, author of more than 50 novels and one of the highest paid writers in America, made her summer home there. I asked Mrs. Reinert how she happened to become a writer. Here are her own words. "I always thought I could learn to write if I just had the time, but I had 3 small ones and my husband to look after. Also my mother, who for several years was a helpless invalid. Then, during a financial panic, we lost everything. I was driven frantic by debts. I made up my mind I was going to earn some money by writing, so I made up a schedule, planning every hour for the week in advance. Certain periods during the day and in the evening after I got the children off to bed while Dr. Reinert was out making calls, I set aside for writing." I asked Mrs. Reinert if working on such a tight schedule didn't wear her down. "On the contrary," she smiled, "my life took on a new zest." Mary Roberts Reinert didn't know much about how she inspired me. I'm going to back that one up too. Mary Roberts Reinert didn't know how much she inspired me. After I returned home, I did a far better job than I had ever done before of managing Frank Betker and his time. I ran across a poem years ago by Douglas Malloch. I cut it out and put it in my scrapbook. I read it and reread it until I knew it by heart. I read it and reread it until I knew it by heart. It did something for me. Maybe it will do something for you. Here it is. "There may be nothing wrong with you, the way you live, the work you do, but I can very plainly see exactly what is wrong with me. It isn't that I'm indolent or dodging duty by intent. I work as hard as anyone, and yet I get so little done. The morning goes, the noon is here, before I know the night is near, and all around me I regret are things that I haven't finished yet. If I could just get organized, I oftentimes have realized not all that matters is the man. The man must also have a plan. With you, there may be nothing wrong, but here's my trouble, right and wrong. I do the things that don't amount to very much of no account, that really seem important though, and let a lot of matters go. I nibble this, I nibble that, but never finish what I'm at. I work as hard as anyone, and yet I get so little done. I do so much you'd be surprised if I could just get organized. A summary of Part 1. Pocket Reminders. 1. Force yourself to act enthusiastic and you'll become enthusiastic. Make a high and holy resolve that you will double the amount of enthusiasm that you have been putting into your work and into your life. If you carry out that resolve, you will probably double your income and double your happiness. How can you begin? There is just one rule. To become enthusiastic, act enthusiastic. 2. Remember the one sentence uttered by Walter Lamar Talbot. After all, this business of selling narrows down to one thing, just one thing, seeing the people. Show me any man of ordinary ability who will go out and earnestly tell his story to 4 or 5 people every day, and I'll show you a man who just can't help making good. 3. If you want to overcome fear and rapidly develop courage and self-confidence, join a good course in public speaking, not just a lecture course. Join only a course where you make a talk at every meeting. When you lose your fear of speaking to an audience, you lose your fear of talking to individuals, no matter how big and important they are. One of the greatest satisfactions in life comes from getting things done and knowing that, this is 4. 4. One of the greatest satisfactions in life comes from getting things done and knowing you have done them to the best of your ability. If you are having trouble getting yourself organized, if you want to increase your ability to think and do things in the order of their importance, remember, there is only one way. Take more time to think and do things in the order of their importance. Set aside one day as self-organization day or a definite period each week. The whole secret of freedom from anxiety over not having enough time lies not in working more hours, but in the proper planning of hours.